Well, look, I mean, a few great things, and we're going to start the show. I just want to, Andrea and Damone, or Damon as we've had him on our episode. Damone will have gotten married since we recorded this episode. They're going to get married this weekend.
Guys.
So congratulations to you guys. I know that you both met, I think, out on Warped Tour.
That's right.
And, you're getting married this weekend, so have a wonderful wedding. And look forward to seeing the photos and everything. So congratulations, Damone and Andrea. All right. On another note, went to a show this weekend. It was great.
You went to a show?
I actually went to a show. I went to a show
What'd you
this
go see?
weekend. Went and saw X at the Greek.
Really?
X at the Greek, and it was super fun to go to X. It was I worked a lot of shows with X, and I liked watching band dynamics all those years. And one of the things I felt with X, and I know there was a lot of things going on with their personal lives and everything, but I never seemed like they were joyous on stage. They were never having that pure joy. And I saw them this weekend.
Because there was a lot of angst in their performance
Well,
because of who they thought their image was?
There was angst. There was maybe some, dependency issues on different things.
Oh, I see.
And the band just never seemed happy to but they were so good. Like if you were growing up in LA during that 80s punk scene, X was the band
Right.
that, I loved working their shows. I loved working for them. I would always enjoy working with them. But I do have to say, Tony, a couple things from that night. They seemed really happy playing together.
At the Greek, right?
At the Greek, they seemed happy playing together. They were smiling. Billy Zoom, who had been through a lot of health issues the last few years. Exene looked great on stage. She seemed just like flowing with what she always was, her music, which flowed with it. John Doe's great. And then, of course, DJ Bonebreaker just still rips on drums. And, it was Dave Grohl's daughter came out and sang a song, which was kind of cool. See that. And it was really fun to be out. But it was also kind of dawned on me that we're going through a time in the music industry right now where we're all like, we're coming out of this pandemic.
Well, I have to tell you that the Greek has become one of the premier back venues at LA. Because
outdoors.
It's outdoors and everybody loves it. Like I just saw Rufus, as you know, and 21 Pilots, and there's a bunch of others. The other two, Walter Sumney is playing the Ford. All these outdoor venues are getting a resurgence in LA, and they're great. They're wonderful.
The John Anson Ford. Oh, yeah, we'll have to talk about that at some point. I used to do a lot of shows at the John Anson Ford, X being one of them.
Yeah.
We did multiple nights with X, and I'll never forget, Exene had a son, and we had to, make a cradle for him out of a milk crate. It was crazy one time. And, while they went on stage, it was we put towels, stage towels in, and had the baby in there while she went and played. But it was great to see them playing. Let's get into this episode because I think we're almost there's a time when you just play the hits. And in 1998, we were a hit. Warped Tour was a hit in a place called Australia. Have you ever been there?
How did you get to Australia?
Well, we're going to get into that. But then we tried to re-release it in 2013, and it didn't quite go as well. So it's kind of live with the hits, and we had a hit with Warped Tour in Australia.
So what this show is about, and if we tease it at the front of the end, is when Kevin wandered in the land down under.
This episode's going to have a lot of people on it, Tony. So I was thinking, we should probably name all these people that are going to pop in and out of this show. Because
Absolutely.
I did a lot of interviews, and I know a lot of people are going to go, I wish you talked to me about this. But, there's Rick Thorne, who was a BMX rider on the tour. Andrea Tatrai, who is the production manager on the Australia promoter side. Kerry Nicholson, who comes in and out of our episodes sometimes, that turned into my production manager on Warped Tour for 25 years.
Right.
Was the production manager on that tour. Kelley Electa, who should have her own comedy show. She should have her own thing because she's one of the funniest people. She was working in my production office and wanted to go on that tour, and I brought her, and we'll be talking about her. Neil Hendricks, who was a professional skater on that tour. Krista Makes, the lead singer and guitarist of Less Than Jake. I got a hold of Joe Escalante of the Vandals.
All right, on. And so when the concept came up of, you had a really successful run, you were doing a lot of tours, how did it come about? What made you go across the Pacific?
Well, it came up kind of early because I was also in 1995 doing production for bands still. Warped Tour was losing money. We were barely hanging on. and I was doing production, and I got offered to go on a tour with Porno for Pyros, which was Perry Farrell's After Jane's Addiction band. And I loved that band. And, just the creativity of Perry Farrell was always amazing to me. So I got to go on the Big Day Out, which was the known music festival in Australia. It was like Vivian Lee, these people put on this festival. It played all the major cities. I was hired as the production manager for Porno for Pyros.
I didn't know that.
And I went over there on Big Day Out, and I had these, it was the craziest tour because I was hired, and I thought, like, paying homage to the community you're in. It goes back to what I did with Warped, was we started in New Zealand. So I thought we would do something in honor of the Maori tribal people. Right. So we had designed a set and brought in some things. And I had this whole set designed by Aboriginals.
Right. That's cool.
And there was dot art with bird spirits. It was this whole thing I kind of designed. And we were going to bring it on tour. And it's the craziest thing, Tony. I'll tell you why in a second. But it was like, we got over there, and I made the show worked in New Zealand. But there was a lot of tension among the camps at that point because there was a manager and there were some other people doing probably not the coolest things to Perry at that point. And I see what you're saying. I was like trying to fight because I really believed in what Perry was all about. Like,
he's incredible talent.
I almost followed him into the Golan Heights once to do something delivered by spacemen, even though the Golan Heights is at war. So that's how much I believe.
That's a whole other story.
Talk about cult. Like, I was like in the Perry Farrell cult at that point. So we got down to Australia, and Perry got hooked up with a guy named Nick Cave.
Huh.
And everyone knows that Perry had some drug issues at that point. And they got hooked up pretty quickly on that tour. And all of a sudden, it was like great timing for one of the other people on the tour and the manager of the tour, the manager of that band at that point. It felt like I was almost the instant bad person. Because at that point, I had already started Warped Tour. We had done it in 95. Now, you got to figure this is running their summer, which is December.
Right.
So I went down there, and I really was trying really, really hard. And I felt like I was on the outside from the beginning of that tour. And I was trying, and I had these little balsa wood bird spirits actually made by Aboriginal artists. And I started to realize there was a lot of racism in Australia towards the Aboriginals.
You think?
So people weren't as stoked as I was to actually had Aboriginal artists backstage at the shows.
And this was in
95. 90, right there. And I didn't realize. I thought, wow, this is a tribute to their culture. And Perry started getting into what he was doing on the road there, which was 93% pure or whatever it was at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, he showed up at the second show and said I had put spacemen in the monitors. Like, he literally said I had put spacemen in the monitors.
Right.
And I knew I was fucked at that point. And we were going up from the Gold Coast to do a night and evening show up in Brisbane. You did these one-off shows where the bands would go off the festival and do these shows because the shows were on weekends. So we get picked up at the hotel. We're staying like the SeaWorld Resort. I'll never forget, like the SeaWorld Resort. And we jump in this van, and at this point, I knew I was out because the people were trying to get rid of me.
Because you were, and let me back up. Let's explain to why you felt like you were on the outs. You were trying to do your job in an environment that was challenging.
That was, let's say, challenging. They were taking advantage.
So we're being politically
they were taking
sensitive.
advantage of. They're basically ripping money off of them. Honestly.
Oh, really?
And I saw this, and I was like, trying.
Okay.
And so we went to the Gold Coast, or we went up to Brisbane that night, and I rode in the van, and this guy named Kerry Nicholson was our driver.
Right.
He was actually driving that coach. And at that point, it was very quiet. There was a lot of tension on the bus. So I had just started talking to the driver. I sat up with the driver. That turned into Kerry Nicholson. And I'll never forget Kerry. And if you want the best, cheapest bowl of noodles in Australia, meet Kerry Nicholson. He always knows. I got the best noodles, mate. And so he's like, I know this. And he knew the other day when we talked, he knew exactly what restaurant we ate at and stuff.
Right.
And we went to the restaurant, and I was just like, man, I think that I have to be, I'm in a really bad spot, with this show. I've never been put in this position.
And was it the situation where you stuck it out, or did you have to fly home? I mean, am I
We
blowing
went
your
to the
story
next
here?
show, and we had these little bird spirits were made like out of balsa wood, like set pieces that had to be flown. And at that point, Rage Against the Machine was playing right before Horn of Her Pyros.
Right.
And I was literally taking washers and tying fishing line up, trying to throw it up into the rigging.
Why?
Just to be able to hang these things.
Oh, really?
And so all day I'd have to go out between bands and throw them up. And even though we've made amends, Pete Reedling was the road manager for Rage at that point. He manages Tool now. He did something. I was on edge. I was just not sleeping. I was getting there early in the morning. And me and him had a physical altercation on the loading dock that night. And so
rock and roll, man.
So then we started heading south. And we were heading south, and we played Sydney, and it wasn't getting any better. And then we were going down to Melbourne. I had met these people who were, the Otway Ranges were like the last hardwood forest, like our redwoods, like going in.
Right.
And they were being logged at that point. So I had met these environmentalists who invited us to go down to the Otway Ranges to see what was going on. And between Melbourne and the Otway Ranges was a place called Bell's Beach, kind of a famous surfing spot. So I had it all set up that we would all go down on our days off. There was always days off on this tour. We would drive down to a place called Apollo Bay, one of the most beautiful places in the world. And we went to Bell's Beach, and it was just tension. There was no waves. And someone actually came up to me and said, Perry blames you for making the waves go away. This is how fucked up it was for me at that point. So at that point, we walked to the van, and I said, Perry's like, I need to get back to the city. I believe what I know he had to get back for, but whatever. He had to go back to the city. I said, these people are awesome. They invited us down to their homes to learn about this. I'm going to learn about the environment down here. Who wants to come with me? Few people jumped in who were shortly fired from the band.
Wow.
And I went to do our thing, and Perry went back to the city, and I walked in the lobby, and I'll never forget the co-production man, the person that was out on the road with us, the road manager, looked at me, said, hey, he had a plane ticket in his hand. And I said, but by that point I knew I was going. I knew it was already happening. So I kind of set a guy named Sean London, who's turned into a great touring person and everything, to be able to, he was a stage manager. So he could finish the tour.
Okay.
And literally I was just like, just give me my plane ticket.
So this is Kevin Got Fired.
Fired part 2.
Kevin got fired twice. Wow.
But
I mean, is it all cool again?
I sat at a bar mitzvah for a wedding.
Did you ever
with
talk to Perry?
Yeah, I saw him. We sat at a table together. I mean, I have no ill feelings.
I actually sat with him and his wife over at the Breeders' Cup over at the races.
Different time, different place, But for me, that story was there. But during that story, this driver, I told him about this little tour I started in America called the Warped Tour. Right. And I think there was some tension maybe between me and Perry. Someone had planted in his head that I was trying to
take over
his gig, and I wasn't. So I started telling this guy, Kerry Nicholson, like, hey, man, I'm going to bring this to Australia at some point. And he says, I'd love to come on to America. So it all led to Kerry Nicholson flying on his own dime and showing up and touring America with me, and which led to this kind of discussion like surf culture. If there's anything close to Southern California surf culture, it's Australia. So I went to Vans, who now was signing up as my sponsor in 1996. And I said, we should go down to Australia. We got to go down to this place, man.
They've got feet down there.
They surf, they skate. It's great lifestyle. And that's what kind of led us to this concept, because we were now picking up momentum in the United States.
Right.
And this is what kind of picked up. And then we kind of approached our touring people like Rick Thorne about going down to Australia.
That year we did Australia. Didn't we do Europe too? You guys came out, you were like, okay, we're going to do the States. I don't know, like 8 weeks, and then Europe 8 weeks, and then take a couple weeks off, and then Australia. And so that was something that you guys asked us to do. Those like 13 weeks straight or something crazy like that. And the Australian tour was rad because I'd been there before. Actually, that's where me and you had met actually on the Big Day Out tour. Me and Tony Hawk went out there, and so to go do Warped Tour to me and Australia was exciting because it was like being able to travel, with the tour over there was rad, and it was one of the raddest tours. But yeah, you guys had asked me to do it. I think just based off of the relationship we had, and we'd been going for a couple years before that.
So as this got ramped up, I'm thinking about you had some success with Warped Tour here. You had the bands that you picked, and there's new hits that are coming out. But you also have, the sports side of it and the culture. Did you bring all the same people?
I went to Chris Dawson, who works with Daryl Eaton at CA, and said, hey, we're starting to do Europe. We're doing all these things. Wouldn't be Australia would be great? And he hooked us up with a promoter named Michael Chugg. And Michael Chugg is a very famous person from Australia. And he was willing to do it. But I'm like, I had some kind of insisted that we kept the ticket prices reasonable, that we did it Warped Tour style.
Right.
Because you'll find that when bands go overseas, the ticket prices always seemed very high. And I always felt they were very high. And I said, let's try to deliver a good ticket price at a fair, and do it Warp style. Simple. We'll keep it during the day. We'll keep
no
it
light rigs.
Lighting rig, that kind of thing. So Andrew, who worked with the biggest bands that ever toured Australia. We're talking bands would do arenas. It was a certain level of touring. All of a sudden, he's got to work with us.
They didn't want to camp because we had to. It wasn't until we had a look at what the budgets could possibly be that we decided that we had to camp because we didn't have the budgets for, and we didn't have good hotels in the regional shows. I mean, once we sort of, it was a really funny time, 97, 98, because Big Day Out had come as a young festival in the early 90s, 92. It sort of become mainstream. They had a year off in 96 or 97. It had become mainstream. Then all of a sudden you came along with this fresh, new, radical, it's all young and punk. And the kids sort of really, there's a big segment of them that really jumped on that. So I think it was Michael and AJ Matter, AJ, who said, "Oh, look, we've got to take this regional because we need X amount of shows to make the tour work." So we were looking to fill 9 shows, and the only way to fill 9 shows in Australia, because we're so we've only got 4 or 5 capital cities, is to do some regional areas.
He needed to do that many shows to. What he was saying was to turn a profit, right?
Yeah, to make it work. All of a sudden, we're talking about okay, so we're going to start at the Gold Coast. And then we're going to drive down to Byron Bay, which is awesome.
Wait. But the distance between cities in Australia is massive, right? Am I wrong?
Normally you would fly. Normally you fly. But we did not fly. So they're like, okay, we didn't go over to Perth on this trip.
Okay.
But they're like, okay, so Kevin, here's what we're going to do. And I'm like, camping? I kind of suggested camping. He goes, how are you going to make this work? I go, let's camp. He goes, no one camps. And I go, yeah, let's camp. It'll be cool. It's summertime. No,
why not? Let's go camping.
So we're filling in these shows where you would normally play Brisbane. Maybe you would play Sydney, Adelaide, Melbourne. It's not a lot. It's 4.
Right.
I'm like, we need to do more shows. We're going to be down here. Let's work. it's Warp style. We work every day.
Let's go.
So then we filled in with places like Byron Bay and a place called Coffs Harbor. And we found a place in Ulladulla and then Manly Beach.
And how were those shows? Did you fill them up?
Crushed. So,
that's awesome.
So all of a sudden it's I had a Kerry Nicholson now, who's my production manager in the United States, but he's going to do this tour. And he had I don't know if we officially were camping on the first tour.
We started on the Gold Coast on the Spit, and it was all camping. And it was actually illegal to camp there. I still, to this day, don't know if we had approval for it. I'm sure we did. But it was all tents and just some sit-up coaches, some buses.
When we talk about buses in the States, Tony, you visualize those tour
those
buses.
Big old tour van buses.
No. This was senior citizens to Vegas casino day, like, the kind that you see.
So you have 30, 40 seats in them.
Like 63 seats.
Yeah, that doesn't sound
And
comfortable at all.
with a, so we literally were like, and this is what I'm telling the best. It's going to be cool, man. We're going to camp. We're going to like roll. And these buses, they don't have tour buses, but it'll be good. It'll be cool. And we're going to go from city to city. So all of a sudden, it's like, I think the word started kind of like, everyone was in at first. It's like, sometimes you feel like the Pied Piper and everyone like jumps off a cliff with you. And all of a sudden, it started to dawn on some of the people what we were doing. And, Rick Thorne always sums it up the best.
Every day, this is what we do. We'd roll in and we'd get to the venue, we see where we're at, and then everyone would pick their spot where they were going to sleep because you had a tent. It was great. It was better than a hotel because you could pick where you actually wanted to sleep and design it yourself. And, that was crazy, bro. I mean, looking back, like, I don't think I showered the whole time I was there.
It's hilarious to think that, we're looking back at this happening back in 98 or whatever. These people that were on this tour in their mid 40s and early 40s, they would never do that shit.
Oh yeah,
now.
no. I mean, literally, we would pull in, and it'd be dark because we'd do a show, and then we'd drive to the next city and get there like 3, 4 in the morning, and the sun would be like coming up in 3 hours. It was summertime in Australia, and like at the first one, we had to set up our tents ourselves. We moved up the second year. Actually, someone went ahead and set up tents.
I think it's smart
but
there.
The first year, it was like you literally had to set up your tents, and then Kelley Electa, like, I don't know if you've ever met Kelley, but Kelley is fantastic. But even on the U.S. tour, it was like, can Kelley go on the U.S. tour? Her makeup's always perfect. She's a wonderful person. Was one of my dear friends. But it was like, well, we took her on the U.S. tour. It was like everyone kind of had bets. Can Kelley make it on tour? Like, she would literally get up.
Well, even the U.S. tour, it wasn't like you were getting chocolate mints on your pillow every night.
No.
Australia would have been a little more challenging even than the U.S. tour.
She wanted to go on this trip, so she kind of describes the living quarters like as good as anyone.
So it was about to be 1999, and I had been working with you out at the Claremont offices and part of the U.S. tours. And, of course, Australia, was New Zealand in the mix still? New Zealand and Hawaii? Yeah. Yeah. So, I think myself and wasn't it Ponce and Mindy also, we all went with kind of a ladies lounge type setup out there. I just remember the three of us flew out there with like all the metal militia guys. It was all the motocross guys. I just kind of remember being with everybody with that group and walking through the botanical gardens. And that was my first encounter with a flying fox. And it happened to be very, very large. And I was like, it felt like Jurassic Park. So that was, I think, our kickoff to Australia. And then, of course, we met up with everybody. And that's when we encountered the actual tents. I have a memory of being with Serena. She was Serena Fomenko at the time. And we were like tent mates. And it rained. And I just remember water kind of like seeping through the tent. And I was like, oh my gosh. And just, spiders, whatever, anything that freaked me out was basically all around me. Or it may not have been, but in my mind, it certainly was. And I just also remember some of the shower options. And one of them was just literally like straight off the beach. Like, there you go. There's the shower.
They had lights on their heads looking for spiders. If you go looking for something to kill you in Australia,
you're going to
find it. Here you are with this production manager that's done like AC/DC, Men at Work, does all the big, Michael Jackson. And all of a sudden he's put in charge of camping. And Andrew was funny how he touched on like some of the camping that he remembered.
He was there. He had to stay the night with you
guys?
Yeah,
he was with us.
Just goes to show that, we as humans, we always have this blue sky thinking, and we were in this beautiful, town up at Noosa, which is just north of Brisbane. And we had this beautiful showground, and we thought, oh, this is wonderful. We have this lovely camping area. We chose this beautiful hollow, nice green grass. We should have had a little bit more experience. And anyway, we set up all the tents, and we were started the show. The bands all came in for the show, and then all of a sudden we had like 3 or 4 inches of rain. And basically the tents and the air mattresses that they were on floated away overnight. Now that wouldn't mean too bad, but some of them were still on them. So because the rain came overnight,
What?
it turned out that the place we decided to camp was a floodway. And so all the water just sort of came down and just shifted everything. And I saw a comment from our friends from Frenzell Rom who said it was a filthy sea of muddy tents. And what he was actually describing is not the before but the after, because we pretty much had to ditch all those tents and go get new ones because they were all just destroyed pretty much.
Wow, that's crazy.
This is like the first night of the tour. So
that was the first night.
So,
you think somebody would figure out, do we really want to pitch a tent in a floodway?
Oh, yeah.
He said 2 to 3 inches in one night. That's no joke.
No, it was no joke. There was it was no joke rain. But you have to all of a sudden start realizing, the whole thing, going
did
back.
Did anybody quit? No, let me ask you. Did anybody say, fuck this?
No, everyone, look.
Come on.
No, was Fletcher going to let you jump ship?
No, I wouldn't fuck with Fletcher.
Were you jumping ship? Because that's when.
Yes, sir.
And I was kind of the same way. Are you jumping ship? Now, rewinding a little bit, it was funny because some of the bands were kind of they figured out they were staying in tents, so they started. And I'll never forget a band, 311, massive band, multiple hits.
Yeah, 311's huge.
The night, a couple days before we left on tour, I'm having dinner with friends at my house. I'll never forget this night. And the agent calls me and starts yelling at me about this whole camping situation, even though we've been up front from the beginning.
Right.
And I literally put, there's 8 people sitting at my dinner table, and it was their agent up there. And I just put him on speakerphone and went back into my party. And about 20 minutes, every 20 minutes, I'd walk out and go, hey, I'm sorry. And then put him on speakerphone and go back to my dinner party.
Jesus.
But we were all camping. But, it's funny because,
I don't believe
who seemed to adapt the best to this were some of the athletes. And because they were
used to. Of course, they're used to that. They're athletes. They can take it, man. They're tough guys.
And it was interesting to hear about, Neil Hendricks, how they approached the tour.
Now, was this Neil's first Warped Tour?
No, he'd been on the U.S. tours.
Okay, so he's
been out on the U.S. tours. He's been around.
Knows you guys are legit, and this is cool, right?
Yeah.
I tell the stories from those tours a lot just because we've done the tour in the States a couple times. It was the first time that I was used to doing skate tours in cars and vans. And so, it was the first time that we did tours in tour bus. So it was super cool experience for us. It was definitely grueling, all those tours that we did. But I remember when you and Steve Van Doren told us about the opportunity to go to Australia. And it's funny because it ended up being a bit of a bait and switch, because at first you guys were like, hey, we're going to Australia. The schedule's going to be a little bit mellower. You're going to have some days off in between, because we were used to, in the States, it was just hammering every single day, skating every single day. There were times when it was 14, 15, 18 days in a row. And I remember you guys saying hey, Australia is going to be a chill schedule. They don't have tour buses, so we're going to be driving in between the cities. And then we get a couple months later, you guys came back and you're like, hey, I don't personally remember the exact story. I think maybe one of the sponsors, the promoters down there had lined up, fell through. And you're like, hey, some stuff changed with Australia. Now we're going to be in tents. I remember you guys kind of gave us the opportunity to back out, because we had already agreed to it and we knew we were going for a few weeks and staying in hotels and driving city to city. And all of a sudden it turned into us staying in tents. And I've never really been a camping guy. I've always loved being outside. I always loved doing sports outside. I was an outside guy, but I never grew up camping. And so all of a sudden we're doing this skate tour for, 3 weeks or whatever in Australia in tents. I was like, oh, this is going to be harsh. But you guys gave us the opportunity to bail out if we were scared of it. And I was like, no way, man. I love Australia. I'm in.
Not being a camping guy. And then the first night was awesome how he handled the situation.
I have a couple stories. I don't even know if you know these stories, because there's a couple that we probably kept from you. But one that we always talked about is the very first Australia tour when we were doing tents. The very first night, we were somewhere in a little beach town in Gold Coast or Sunshine Coast, maybe like Burley Heads or somewhere. The very first night, I was tent buddies with Steve Caballero, and him and I had shared rooms in hotels for years.
That's
so
cool. Steve's cool.
That was cool. And I'm a lifelong Caballero fan. So I'm like, I'm sharing a tent with Cab. That's cool. So the very first night, it's raining like crazy, and we had spiders in our tent. And at like midnight, it's raining. There's spiders in our tent. I like bail out, and I'm like, Cab, I'm walking to a freaking hotel. And he's like, what do you mean? Wait. And I'm like, I'm out. I can't do this. I'm walking to a hotel. Got out in the rain at midnight and just walked until I could find a hotel. And all my buddies, like Mike Frazier and those guys, were all making fun of me because I was like wussing out and like gave up on tents the first night. And so I walked to a hotel, and I just find a little like mom and pop hotel with 20 rooms. And I show up at midnight and just rent a room. And I'm like, I can do the tent thing, but not when it's pouring rain and there's spiders in the tent. So all the dudes were making fun of me. They all show up at my hotel at like 4 a.m. They gave up on it also in the middle of the night, and they just walked to the hotel and said, hey, our buddy's staying here somewhere. What room is our buddy in?
That's hilarious.
So now it's
so
like
stupid.
You've got your athletes, you got your crew. We're all camping. There's like people floating away on rafts. You got to visualize this.
No, you said that this tour was a success, right? Because it doesn't sound like it went well.
No, the kids, they'd never seen.
It sounds like it went like the Halloween event.
But they've never seen anything like in Australia like that. And the kids came out.
I'm sure they did.
It was a value package. I mean, you got to think we had Blink-182, we had Pennywise, 311.
Oh, and you gave them a fair price, and you went to their town.
And we went to there. We drove to their places. We didn't just play the big city centers. And, it was great because, of course, anytime I get a chance to, of course, catch up with Chris from Less Than Jake, he's willing to jump on. And, of course, they were on that tour, and he had his, description of what it was like for a band on that tour.
The first show was New Year's Eve in Auckland. We started in New Zealand, and we did the show there and then came over to Australia, which would have been January of 99.
Yeah, and do you remember the accommodations in New Zealand at all?
I do. We stayed at these. They reminded me of something you'd see out of a 1940s army barracks. I remember us and Hepcat were the last ones in this one room, and they kind of got the last halfway decent room. The room we were in had spiders, and I remember the mattress was pretty paper thin, but man, we were so young and we had never been to New Zealand. So the whole thing, we were just enamored by it all. You could have maybe sleep in a mud puddle. I wouldn't have cared. Some of us finally, we opted out of going overnight on the Greyhound. It was a little more money, but we were getting these RVs and they all looked the same. It was just like these family RVs that, comfortably you probably could have had 2 or 3 people in this thing, maybe 4, husband and wife and their 2 kids. We had 8 people in this thing. We were sleeping on rafts on top of each other. We had someone sleeping across the steering wheel on the front. It was just, and like you said, you'd get to the gig and, there once in a while, there might be shore power we could plug into, but there was no generator on this thing. So we didn't have any power to plug into. You were sweating your butt off by 8 in the morning.
So you got the vans with no air conditioning, but you have people sleeping in these tents. We've only gotten 3 hours of sleep. And the sun's beating down on them. And production's got to get up. But all of a sudden, the bands are waking up. The crew, everyone's out in the morning. We're up, hanging out. And we have this, Quonset hut, camp. They were caravan cookers. They weren't, touring caterers.
Uh-huh.
They were, people that would camp, if a group of geologists came and studied Australia. And they were, set up this little tent in the morning. And there'd be flies everywhere. And this guy named Andy McDonald would have this hat, and he designed this hat that I can't believe didn't go into mass production, but he hooked plastic forks, knives, and spoons around it to keep the flies off his face. So you're hanging out with all these people, and then the bands are rolling around in these they're little boxes. I mean, it's no bigger than what we're sitting under. And there's 8 people piled into them.
This sounds like a fucking nightmare.
It's so much fun. My God.
Yeah, it sounds like a blast.
But so in the meantime, I'm setting up, we roll into Byron Bay. There's professional surfers there ready to take you for surf lessons.
Oh, cool.
Or you want to go to Nimbin, which is like known as like the drug town of Australia. Nimbin's like hippie town. Bands could go on a field trip there if they wanted to smoke weed or whatever they wanted to do. So it was like we would keep rolling down the road, and everyone's it's brutal as you can hear, but everyone's having so much fun. And then all of a sudden it's like you got Joe Escalante. Joe Escalante, lead singer of the Vandals. I asked him what his memories of that tour were like.
The food was terrible, I got to tell you, Kevin. The first year of the Warped Tour in Australia, usually you have such great food. You have Tada catering with Shelley Lynn. And that first year, you had no way of knowing. You hired some food people and they were making gruel. And I tried it 1 or 2 days. And then every day after that, I would go out into the front of house and just buy a sausage or something or a burger from one of the vendors that was selling to the customers. And then, I got horrible heartburn. But
the crazy thing was, there's awesome shows. Like the shows would be like, no one expected more than a couple thousand people show up.
Right.
And there's like 5,000-10,000 kids showing up at these shows. So
great.
We're having great shows. And for a lot of these bands, like Pennywise had been there. Blink maybe had played a couple shows. But most of the time, this was, just kind of going down there for the first time. And then, Joe was actually on the buses with us. We've talked to a couple bands who rode in their own little motorhome kind of things. Joe actually rode on the buses.
Well, I remember in Australia, there's not an industry of tour buses for bands. So all these bands, most of them are used to being in a tour bus, and there isn't a tour bus. So you're in like a tourism bus, like with a bunch of rows of seats. You're just sitting in a seat to get to the next town. And, that was a little rough. Everyone is desperate to find, like, isn't there something around here we could rent? And I think Pennywise got this little motorhomes, these twin motorhomes, but they were just little campers. And so they had that, and everyone else was in these tourism buses. And then you had warmed us up to the idea of, you don't need a hotel. We can have tents and we'll have a great time. And and it was a different, I don't know if it was a great time. It was a different time than the Warped Tour in the U.S.
I can still hear it in your voice.
You managed to convince the whole tour that this is a good idea, and everybody did it.
You're still trying to convince
with
them.
The exception of those 2 campers that Pennywise got.
He's still trying to say it's a great idea right now. You can feel the pressure. It's fine, Tony. We can do it again. It's fine.
You know what? If I went back and asked them all to do it again, I bet everyone would go, sure, right now. Absolutely.
Look,
the way the world's been recently.
The show's turned out really great. Well, you have to admit there's a little Tom Sawyer in you. You're getting people to paint the fence, and they're digging it. So that's cool.
It was an innocent time having fun, just this moment in time that we all just did. We've been talking about tents. We've been talking about sitter buses. We've been talking about food, but really like hygiene became like this weird issue on the tour.
Nobody wants to hang out with someone who does not smell fresh and lovely.
So Joe's like the lead singer. Joe is like, I don't know if you know Joe Escalante, but he's been like a judge and he's a lawyer.
Oh, really?
And he plays in a punk rock band.
Oh, that's cool.
But then Warren is like an alien. Like Warren is like, I always look at I love Warren, but if you ever spend time with the guy, you would look at it and go, man, someone sent someone from another planet and forgot to include a few parts.
If you want a good punk rock band, you got to mix it up.
So Warren, it's embedded in my brain, Warren on this tour. And Joe describes it. It's like the etching of like visualization of him on this tour is etched into my brain forever. I will die with the last vision of Warren.
Somehow he would end up with just a pair of like, running shorts of some kind. I don't know, basketball shorts, maybe. And then it was hot, in Australia. And this is something that would never happen today. But what year are we talking about yeah. So I think when you went to a rock show or a punk rock show, you expected to see something wild. And he was a wild maniac guitarist, like in the pattern of Angus Young, but Angus Young if Angus Young just went berserk and every time and injured himself. So he would end up with these shorts and his arms through the shorts.
Yeah.
And it just looked like a thong by the time he was. We were lucky if it looked like a thong by the time he was into that mode of the set. And then he would take over lead vocals for one song and go crazy. And then I get every once in a while, all the clothes would come off. And that was kind of like something you would see at a punk show in a small club. But at a large festival, it did alarm some people. And he ended up on the cover of the newspaper of the city of Manly, is right next to Sydney, the Manly Daily. He ended up on the cover, and it just said like, "Naked man ruins otherwise successful festival."
Oh, yeah.
I didn't ruin it.
Like Warren would be like he had this, but the way he took these like jib shorts and he would stretch them up over his head and put his arms through the legs and play. But he did end up naked.
Sounds really wrong.
And we're doing this whole tour, and he's like ending up naked in a lot of like covers of lots of newspapers across the country. So, but like, and then we go back into like getting naked, goes back to those showers.
Right.
And Kelley explains kind of like what it was like for hygiene on that tour.
I was not ever somebody who ever camped before, so it was definitely a brand new experience for me. And, then you combine, throw in the elements, and I was definitely a little bit like, oh my goodness. And then of course, I brought my hair dryer. I don't know if you remember that. I would go into the production office and actually like blow dry my hair. And everyone was rightfully laughing at me. I just remember I tried to get up super early because it was essentially a communal shower. So, it was sort of like you can't really lock the door. And I wasn't really up for a communal shower experience. And so I think I went in there to lock the door. I just remember there was like a ton of water. And I was like sort of trying to make my way across like a obstacle course, if you will, to not really step in like this dirty water. And and I remember coming out of that shower, and there was like a couple people like in a line, not stoked that I had locked the door. And I remember there was this woman on the tour who was from Australia, and I was kind of like, sorry, I tried to get my shower in before anybody was up. And then she was kind of like, what's the big deal? Like just to, be showering here with other people. I'm like, yeah, no. And she's like, it's just a buddy mate. And I remember you were kind of like a couple of people back in line, and you laughed. You looked at me like, yeah, it's just a buddy mate.
You got to respect that. You got to have a decent blowout on the road.
I guess so. But, it was one of those things where it was like, we talk about like these hardships, but you always hear laughter behind them. There's like the memories of them
Kevin
and everything.
Trying to sell this package. It's over, Kevin. We did it. Everybody came along. You don't have to tell them it's going to be great.
No, we're into it. We are going to laugh through it. And then, it's like, Neil got into it like the hotel one night, and then he was down with the rest of the program. Well,
yeah, when there wasn't 2 to 3 inches of rain and massive spiders in his tent, then yeah, I could get that he's cool. What are you looking over your shoulder? You're freaking me out. Is there a spider? You're talking about spiders. I'm waiting for one to come down on me.
Yeah. I'm looking at that light over the hill.
Those kids at home that are just listening to this podcast.
Yeah, we're sitting outside
Kevin's
my backyard. It's getting late. Yeah, all right.
Camping one time, dude. We were walking back from the day to go to tour, and I literally was like, hey, let's go back. And a cab or someone stopped me and goes, dude. And I was like this close. Walked into some spider that was like this big hanging in front of my tent. It was pretty awesome. No, that trip was fun. I mean, the weather was good. The weather's always hot. I mean, I always love going to Australia, dude. And so to me, I didn't care if we stayed in tents, hotels, whatever it took. And I think a lot of us were that way. Like, we just loved that tour so much. We were excited to be able to be part of it,
Everyone's starting to ease into it. Even Chris was like, had something to say about the tour. Like, okay, we're starting to see these crowds. Like it's going, it's Tony, it's like one of those things, like you go somewhere and really you feed off the fans. You always like, if you go show up, you might be in hell. Like tour, sometimes your bus breaks down, you're having bad time. People are, but you show up and the fans are there, and the fans came out for the show.
Oh yeah.
And Chris, was fun. Has some comments about that.
This was a tour. I don't even know, Kevin, if you were sure that this thing could have been pulled off in Australia. You got to remember, Australia, when you go over there as a band, typically, and it's worked within the budget and it's reflected in the ticket sale to the fans, they'll pay extra money. They know bands are coming from America and from far away. So, they don't really have like interstates in Australia. They do within the cities, but you can't get to Melbourne to Sydney in 5 hours by car. I mean, it takes forever to drive these things. And here, I remember having days between shows sometimes 1 or 2 days, because you couldn't do it like you do in the States. And we had to drive it to be economical. We couldn't have flown this whole thing around. So I remember thinking, like, how's this all going to play out? But again, we were so young and new and had never been to Australia. We were just stoked to be there.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I understand during some hardships to make it work, the long travels between cities. If you're excited to be in Australia and you're young, and there's something to be said for positive energy around you.
You have to realize we're also touring with Australian bands. Like, we had Frenzo Rom and Grinspoon.
Oh, cool.
And I had done this event early on in the tour where, like, we did a party. Like, I always believe in kickoff parties. US, we always were well known for those. We were doing a kickoff party in Australia, and a little band showed up in a van and wanted to play. And I'm like, sure, want to play? I got 30 minutes, 25 minutes probably at that. There's a band called Living End.
Oh, shit.
Yeah.
Are you serious?
They were kids in a van, just like the U.S. They had heard about the U.S. tour, that you just showed up in a van and you played on this tour maybe. And that's where I made good friends with the Living End. Daryl Eaton became their agent. We actually introduced them up here. He brought them up to the U.S. They didn't have a record deal up here, but they played on our tour, and they were the band in the van.
That's funny.
They were just like all the U.S. bands. So some guy comes down and says, hey, we're just going to bring a show to you like we did in the U.S., finding small communities. Kerry Nicholson brought up the effect of, like, what this meant to the music community in Australia.
We pulled up in some remote little town. And, of course, we didn't look like we belonged there. And we're all going out for lunch. I think they gave us 45 minutes to have lunch. And some of the local girls couldn't believe that all these bands had come to the town. They were in tears. It was kind of impressive. We took entertainment to places that never see it.
And that's what Warped in the U.S. was. So all of a sudden we started doing it. We'd been doing it in Europe, and now we're going down to Australia. So it was a really cool time. And, I never felt it was like a hardship or anything, it was interesting, but it was like the one, like, you're always going to have the Fletcher factor, like, into anything you do. And I'll never forget this funny story, and Andrew brought it up.
In case your listeners don't know, but Fletcher is a behemoth. He would be, 300 pounds. He's 6'6". He's an enormous man. And although he's the most lovely man, he loves to actually put on this aggressive, big face. There's a kind heart behind there, but he loves to scare people occasionally. And he does it very, very well. So, I mean, when he decides to go off or go a bit crazy, you're never really sure whether it's an act or he is really crazy. So there's not just one story. Nearly at every show we did, there was something that Fletcher did that either scared someone to death or got the people on the phone to the riot police or something like that. But always the confrontations with him were sort of really cool. And then afterwards he'd come and give you a hug, which was really dangerous as well, because he could squeeze the life out of you and sort of lift you off your feet as he hugged you and go, don't worry, I was only kidding.
I remember we were playing the Gold Coast, and I know we had some issues, like it was raining all morning, or we were trying to make this work, and we get the show up. And I remember at one point, everyone couldn't figure out, like, where all these kids were getting backstage from. There was kids everywhere. And I know you were like, are you? And I'm like, I'm not letting them back. Where are they coming from? And he actually was pulling him through his motorhome window, like through the little window over the fence, and letting him out the door into the backstage area. I just remember, a lot of times,
Oh, that's right. You know why that was? Because we were so short on budget. We couldn't afford, proper fencing all the way around. So we used to line the motorhomes up to sort of use a wagon train to make a fence backstage, to fence off between backstage and the front stage. Yeah. Imagine some kid being pulled through a window by Fletcher. You'd probably go, man, my life could end right here and right now.
Yeah.
And then being ushered into backstage and being sent to catering.
So this is as good a time as ever, Tony, to tell you about those little motorhomes. Because I always rode on the buses because, it's like, that's my pirate ship. Like,
right.
You don't abandon the ship. But one night, Fletcher said, hey, Kevin, come with us on the van. We're driving from Brisbane over to Melbourne, I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a long drive overnight. Come with us. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to ride in the van. So I jump in with like the whole crew. Like we're, this little box. And I jump in. And finally, we're drinking, we're having fun. We're like kids, like we're on the road. We're having,
on
like,
the road.
Everyone dreams about driving across Australia.
Sure.
And, the drivers like driving, like, am I going to hit am I going to hit like a kangaroo or a wallaby or something? And I'm sleeping. And the next thing I know, I got a fire extinguisher like spraying all over me. Like literally fire extinguisher. I'm like, we're like, what the, we're all like scrambling, trying to figure this out. And there's Fletcher outside the motorhome because when you go to a gas station in Australia, they have fire extinguishers by the pumps.
Right.
He's grabbed the fire extinguisher and he's now sprayed it all over us. He's run into the store, like with this, like in the middle of nowhere, this little outpost, and he's spraying it all over, and he sprays it all over this woman that's working in the gas station.
How high is Fletcher?
No, yeah. So, and like, we're like, what
the fuck
are we doing? And it's like, all of a sudden, it's like, he's like, I thought the tank was on fire. Like he's starting to like cover his tracks. Okay. So he sprayed inside the motorhome. He sprayed us. We're like there. And all of a sudden, like out of nowhere, like the Outback police show up. Like,
oh, geez.
Cycle. We're lined up by the motorhome. And I'm like, that's it. Like we're going to jail in some like this is like going to jail in Tupelo, Mississippi in the middle of the night or someplace. Like, they're like, and he like, excuse me, officers, but I thought the place was on fire. And I grabbed and I pulled the pan, but I didn't know how to stop it. And I ran in to ask the woman inside, like how to stop the fire extinguisher. I apologize for all this.
I don't believe anything you're saying right now.
And I'm like sitting there. We're all lined up because now they got us lined up outside. And the police look us down and they go, I think we can settle this. You should go in and give the woman inside $200 for her dress and get on your way. I'm like,
it is like Tupelo, Mississippi.
Like, he gets away with everything. Like, we were so cut and dry bullshit. Like, should have been like dragged to jail, paid all this stuff, and $200 he gives the lady for her dress to get it cleaned. And we go on down the road to Melbourne. So, we're sitting there and, it was like one of those. So I just thought I had to put that in there somewhere into this episode because that's my memory of those little vans.
What the fuck did he say to you after you all go get in the van? Are you serious? And what are you going to do? Slap him in the face? No, he's 6'6".
No, you don't slap him in the face because remember from other episodes, you don't slap him in the face because that's offensive. Like everything else does to you, but don't slap Fletcher in the face. We're going along, and Andrew, who is so buttoned up, like he's like, I'm starting to drive him crazy.
He's got a schedule.
We're breaking every rule of ever touring and telling him we're just who we are. And he was just hanging in there because now he's not sleeping because he's sitting up at night on rainy tour buses and traveling with us. And he was funny when he summed this up.
We took a crew of carpenters on the road with us because back then there was no modular building. It was all one great big heavy plywood thing and sat on its own drop deck semi. So that was one of the exciting bits. So, I mean, one of the good things was some of the carpenters were also surfers. So that's how we ended up taking the bands for surfing lessons at most of the gigs. I don't know if you remember that some of them would sort of want to miss or change their set times depending on the surf that day, which I thought was very Australian.
So all of a sudden it was like, hey, the band, like they're going surfing today. Can we play later? We also like had bands learning how to play cricket. We were doing all this fun stuff, but we did have a day off. We actually got a hotel in Sydney all of a sudden it's like we're hanging out, and we have this day off in Sydney, Australia. And I don't know if you've been there, Tony, but it is an amazing city. Like, it's one of my favorite cities. And we decided to do something fun. Like, so I got together with Steve Van Doren and said, let's, rent one of those party boats. And I'm sure you've
Sounds
been
like
on
a
them,
blast. Okay, me all
Mississippi
the time.
party boats. So it's like we got one. And, I asked everyone about that moment.
It was just like a 1 day, like
It was like a few hours.
it was a 3 hour.
It was a super fun tour. And, for me, it was like,
Did the weather start getting rough?
no rough weather. It was beautiful evening, summer, time. You're hanging out. But, a lot of these people had little funny moments from being on that cruise ship, including the police who showed up at the end.
Oh, shit. What?
At that time, like having a day off was rare. If we did have a day off, it was normally like a full drive day. So for us to we got to Sydney in the middle of the day and didn't have a show until the next day. And so for us just to even have an evening or a night off was so rare because it was just go, go, go 24/7. We barely had a block of a couple hours off. So for us to have an evening free in Sydney and for it just to come together all last minute, I remember we were all kind of like, hey, we're in Sydney. What are we going to do? And we were right on the harbor and someone had the idea to rent a boat, which was amazing. So we just rented this party boat in Sydney Harbor. And it was cool just because I remember there was music equipment on the boat. Sometimes I guess they have a house band or whatever. And so there were all the guys and gals from the bands were on the boat, and it just ended up being like a all night jam session.
One night you're like, hey dude, let's go. We're going to go on this boat ride and bands are going to play in the boat. And it's just like in the, where the opera house is, Sydney. And I remember being on that and seeing like Suicidal Tendencies play and like different members from different bands getting together to do songs and cruising around in that boat all night. That was like legendary. I got a lot of photos from that, actually. I should send you.
The bands jammed, and it was super fun. And, it was like, it was super cool. And then, but it was always, we always have to add something. And Kerry Nicholson reminded me of something that happened that night.
The cruise where the 18-year-old or the 17-year-old kid dressed in his suit on the steps of the Opera House, and he had missed somebody's birthday boat, and he came on the Warp Tour boat.
What?
You invited him on. You remember that? And Pennywise, we picked up the sound system and some backline gear from the wharf over near the zoo, and Pennywise were playing, and this kid is hanging out the side of the boat while the state party boat that he was supposed to be on went by, and everybody's crowd surfing, and the band were playing. It was a lot of fun.
Oh, let me get this straight. So there was a kid in a
yeah.
suit who missed a boat for a
so
party.
all these boats the party boats come up to this little part of the wharf.
Okay.
And we were waiting, I'm always there first. We're going to check everyone out, but there's other boats and they leave. And this kid shows up like in a suit, like he was going to a party or a wedding or whatever.
Right.
And he's like, oh my God, I go, bro, you're coming with us.
And he's in trouble.
we grab this kid immediately. Like he's now
Let's go!
He's like that guy, like the Lucky Charm. Like, you're
right.
just going to bring the Lucky Charm with you. And he's meeting all the bands. He's out there partying.
Time of his life.
And we go by his friend's boat, and there's like these punk bands playing, and he's like raging, and they're like, kind of hanging out as a bunch of dudes on like a bachelor party. So we had there was always a lot of great moments. Like we're hanging out, but we're camping and we do these things. But then Kerry reminded me some night about something that had to do with like fire walking or something. I don't even remember it.
The fire walking. Big bonfire, and all the skaters started walking through the fire.
Oh shit!
In their bare feet, and then one of them
dumb.
wore his Vans shoes, and they melted.
Oh my God!
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I'm laying in this tent, Tony, and it's like full moon and shadows of this bonfire, and watching all these bands who have sold millions of records,
Right.
doing this thing where they're running around with their pants down around a campfire. And then I look, and there's this like shadow of this family of kangaroos running by me. And this was down in a place called Ulladulla.
Uh-huh.
And it was, I don't know, you have memories from touring, and this one, like, no one's going to duplicate that.
Right.
And, we're sitting there, and then, then all of a sudden it's like, as I'm trying to do stories for this tour, it's like people remind me things, just like, Neil told me he went and got a hotel in the rain, but then, Joe Escalante all of a sudden told me something they did.
There was one time where we flew from, we heard about a giant traffic jam coming from one city to the other. And so Fletcher from Pennywise said, hey, we've chartered a plane, and it's going to cost this much. It goes to the Vandals. Are you guys in? Here's what we're going to go. Yeah, we're totally in. We want to be in that traffic jam. So we order the thing, and we go to this airport in the middle of nowhere. In the middle of nowhere in Australia is really the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
And you go there, and there's nothing. And then pretty soon you wait, and you wait, and you wait, and there's maybe one guy there. And then the lights turn on the runway, and a plane lands. And we get in it, and then we take off, and we're up in the air, and Fletcher decides he's going to fly the plane.
Oh,
and he's just saying, how much will you give me if I fly this plane? And I just kick that guy right out of the cockpit. And then some money is raised. And then it becomes a war between Fletcher and Jim, the singer. And because he's serious, he's going to do it. He's going to rush this guy, throw him out of the cockpit, and start flying the plane. And Jim Lindbergh, it comes down to, I will quit the band right now. If you cross this line and go into the cockpit, I will quit the band. I will never sing again as long as I live. And then that was where it ended, and he didn't do it. But we all thought we were this plane was going to crash because it was a tiny plane, and he had no business doing it. And he's commandeered many things before, and it's never gone well.
So we're talking like I'm riding in the bus at night, and there's all these little things going along, but we always showed up and did the shows. That's how crazy this tour was. And then, you get in there, and like, then we had this community going on, and we were doing things that like you shouldn't be doing on tour. Like they always say, take care of your body, your soul, meditate, do yoga. But we're doing things like learning how to play cricket, surfing. And we had a moment in time where this is when we almost pushed it too far. And this is where the community really pulled together.
311's drummer, he injured himself. And when you're on tour, you shouldn't be playing any kind of extreme sports or something that you could injure yourself with. And I'm sure he learned his lesson. But so then they're going to cancel, but then they go, hey, wait, Josh Freese is on this tour. He can play anything for anybody. Very well-known drummer. So they tell him, and he goes, yeah, I'll do it. And so he has about like a morning to learn the whole 311 set. So he goes off into a corner somewhere with a CD player and headphones and a piece of paper and notes. And he has his own little way of scribbling some code to be able to memorize these things. And that's the thing about a drummer. A great drummer has a great memory. And that's what they develop. They don't develop pitch so much, but they develop a memory to memorize songs and the order. And so he was doing his chicken scratches all morning long. And then by the time it was time to play, there was I think a thought of maybe the drum tech for 311 should do it, since he knew the set better and he could play the drums. And then the decision was made, now Josh Freese can probably do it. So then the time comes, and Josh Freese starts the show. He's nailing it, but the drum tech is there kind of cueing him, like, okay, this is where the change is. And he's like kind of working with them. And then Josh is not even looking at that drum tech. He's almost insulted by it. Like, I know these. And then after like half of one song, the drum tech just throws up his hand and goes, this guy knows the whole thing. So, and he did it the whole way. And that's not the last time he did that. He's done that for Blink-182. He's done it for other bands that, like, just right on the road. I'm gonna substitute and play your whole set and save the day. So he's awesome.
That's cool.
It was super cool. And I'll never forget, like, me, sometimes I took it for granted. I'm like, yeah, Josh can play. But to realize, like, what skill that took to be able to step up and play from being in a punk band to 311, which had kind of a different whole vibe and things going on. And we thought would have lost them on tour. Most tours would have. But by this point, that's what I always say about community.
311 was your big name band on that tour, wasn't it?
Yeah, Pennywise, probably, but it was weird. They were all kind of popping bands. And, it's like, Andrew, though, kind of connected with the different side of the community.
Always, that surf, punk, rock, the risk taking of the skaters and the Supercross guys when we had them was always suited to the coastal scene where we could. Ulladulla was a beautiful spot. I think we sort of spotted it, wanted to go there because the bass guitarist Flea from Red Hot Chili Peppers was based down there. And we sort of thought the place was well known and we're trying to get a local band scene going. As you know, some of the other promoters and yourself, the idea was we'd go to a place, promote it, try to draw out local talent. So we'd have these little road trips where people would go down and they'd hand build a place and try to get people to not only promote it but also come along and play on it because that was the community. And that's why we love the idea that there was very little backstage segregation.
It's still business. That's ultimately what we're out there doing. We're doing business. And Neil brought something up about that tour that I didn't even know happened.
With Somber at catering. And so I ran over to catering and I was like, hey, Cab, ramp's dry. We're going to be able to skate. He's like, okay, I'll be over there in a little bit. I was like, we still got to squeegee the ramp, but we're going to be on in a few minutes. So Cab saw that it was raining. So he just started a chess game or whatever. So we go over, we start skating, huge crowd. We skate for 45 minutes or an hour. Cab never shows up. He just got wrapped up in this chess game. He thought it was raining. So we skated for an hour without Cab. So as soon as we're finishing, we've got to skate again at 5. We're ending. Cab shows up with all of his stuff. And he's like, where are you guys going? And we're like, what do you mean? We just skated for an hour. And he's like, oh man, I thought the ramp was going to be wet. Will you guys skate with me for a while? I'm like, man, we're skating again at 5. You're on your own, dude. I'll skate with you at 5. So Cab goes up and skates by himself. He missed the whole demo, and so he's skating by himself. Well, Steve Van Doren comes by, and he sees Cab skating by himself, and he thinks all of us missed the demo or missed the show or whatever. So he goes and finds us, and so Steve Van Doren finds me and Frazier, and he's like, "Why the hell aren't you up there skating with Cab?" And I'm like, you told us to skate at 2:00 and 5:00. We skated at 2 for an hour, and Cab missed it, got wrapped up in his chess game, and showed up at 3. And Steve was just yelling at us and Cab's the golden boy. He's the Vans kid, and he was the star of the show, and that's awesome. And we all respected that. But he missed the show. We were supposed to skate at 2, and Steve Van Doren was just yelling at me and Frazier, "Why aren't you guys up there skating?" And we're like, we were the ones that were skating at the right time. And so this whole thing got turned around, and Steve Van Doren just yelled at us because he thought that we missed the demo.
Hey, man, you're on time, and the star's not on time. You skate with the star, is what I say, because the star's the star.
Well,
I think Steve had a point there. I got to agree with him.
But being on the road, you create unique games to the environment.
Of course, and
Rick,
running around the fire with no pants on.
Yeah, running around the fire with no pants on. And then, Rick had a different game with some of the other skaters.
Me and Frazier used to play a game where you would get punched if a fly landed on you and you went to bat it off. You would get socked. So that was a game we would just sit and play.
I mean, we're talking grown adults here. Like,
I don't know. I think the cerebellum doesn't completely detach from your head until you're 25.
all of a sudden you've got, you're touring and you've got, your skaters and you got people that kind of know each other. And then Rick just noticed on something completely like that we all picked up on post tour, but Rick picked on it during the tour.
All I know is Warren's one of the raddest dudes, and he would just want to play nude. And so he played nude at a show, and he was up on the monitor or up on the speakers, and like, and I was like, dude, this is the rat. Because you gotta understand, Kevin, coming from the BMX world, up until your tour, Warped Tour, we did state fairs. We did like, we would be like a state fair for weeks, and we would be doing 3-4 shows a day. It was very formulated, very like, systematic, I guess. Like, to be here, do this, do that, do this. And it wasn't like very like lifestyle driven. So to go from that to like Warped Tour in Australia in a tent and Warren nude on stage with all these bands, to me, I felt like I'd finally like made it. You know what I mean? And it was like one of the raddest feelings. But Warren, he would just, I don't know how many days he did it. Did he do it more than one day? I don't remember.
Yeah, so many days.
Yes, he did.
He
made the paper in every city.
But ultimately, Tony, I look at things and I don't know, did it make sense? But it was different. I always wanted to try to do something different. I have my students read a book called Ikigai, and it's how do you live your life each and every day to the fullest? And I think at this point, it was just living life to the fullest. And, now that people can look back at it and look back at the time, and I do recommend this book. My students read it. I make every student read it. And it's just like live it to the fullest. And we were on this tour, and Neil had some comments on that.
Australia has always had such a rad skate community, and they don't, always have a ton of international pro visitors and Steve Caballero and guys like that. Australia's, super far. It's expensive. It's hard to get to. It's hard for companies to do tours and stuff. And so, it was really cool to, I knew some of the Australian skaters, and some of the Australian skaters that I met on that trip. I remember that's when I skated with Renton Miller for the first time, who ended up being a top Australian pro skater for years. And he's ended up being one of my best friends to this day. And he and I traveled the world for a bit after that. So it was really cool just because, Australia's just got such a healthy skate history. And so there's, some places you go and you skate or you do a skate demo, they think it's cool. They don't really know what they're looking at. They're just like, they think it's cool. And you go to Australia and the skate fans there, like they know who all these guys are. They know who Caballero is and what his history is. So that's really cool.
When was it that you, and maybe I should wait till the end, but when was it that you made it back after this tour to Australia?
Oh, Jesus. It was interesting that the last time we went to Australia, I had just finished a European tour with Warped and was pretty exhausted. And I was supposed to fly straight to Australia. And I started to realize that my body, my physical presence would not be there 100%.
Right.
And I didn't go back the last time. It was very weird. It was the one time I just didn't have.
So there was a Warped Tour going on that you weren't on.
Yeah, in 2000, it was about 2013. I just was like, I was exhausted. I'd done this European tour, and I was supposed to get on a plane and go straight there. And I literally changed my flight and came home. Like literally just was like, they can handle it. It'll happen.
And would you say that this particular first one, it sounds like it was a success, certainly.
Oh, yeah.
But was it a financial success?
Financial, great success.
Oh, that's great.
It was fine for everyone. Everyone was very happy. We had a few great tours down there, and then it was also like with, someone like Andrew, who was used to like a headliner.
Yeah, like
their
big
entourage. But I was like, hey, the sponsors are as important as the artists in some ways. Like we all go hand in hand. So when I said we had to like tour together and treat them with the same respect that we were doing it in the US already, but I think it was new to them.
It was new for sponsors to travel, but in some ways you allowed them to rebrand, and it was actually a reverse sponsorship. They were actually getting more out of it because of the connections and the excitement that you brought. It was you were so far from mainstream. It was very attractive for people to add the connection between general pants and jeans and a great time and a great music and radical people.
Yeah, so all of a sudden we had like General Pants was a big supporter. They'd seen the U.S. in the States, so they were super excited. Like, wow, someone's treating us the same, like with respect versus like a burden.
Yeah.
Because I never looked at my sponsors as a burden. And I think that's how we tried to take that culture. But of course, Kerry was already indoctrinated into the warped ways from riding around on the bus with all these people. So for him to go back from being the driver on Big Day Out to being the production manager on this, he thought he had some funny thoughts about that.
The way the tour was, mate, it was like we were gunslingers. We'd just turn up and do it. It was just funny as hell. When you think about it, you wouldn't get away with it. I remember a few years later, we were down in New Jersey, down by the Stone Pony. And the fire marshal turned up. We'd been there for like 5 years, and how long has this been going on? We had 20,000 people there.
Yeah, it was kind of the same way. I don't think we flew under the radar. And that's what I always believe was our success. And we became more and more known. It was, you had more pressure on you.
Sure.
When we were just going and doing our thing, we weren't harming anything. We weren't putting anyone in danger. But I didn't realize for some of these bands that the lasting impact of being on Warped Tour in that first trip of Australia in the mud and the rain and everything else, what that was going to turn into for bands like the Vandals.
Once you do that, you're kind of in. You're grandfathered in. It's very hard to get to Australia for their first tour. It just takes a lot of money. It's a 16-hour flight. And but the music scene was sympathetic to this kind of music because of the surf industry. The surf industry, which, all the surfing soundtracks and skateboarding videos all had this kind of music, Warped Tour music. So they were playing those over there. So they were sympathetic, but still, how do you get over there for your first time? So to go over there on the Warped Tour, every band on that tour had a leg up, and they had a future there. So we went back many times, and then we could do our headlining things, and we milked it, and that's it's a once in a lifetime bucket list thing for many people to go to Australia. But Kevin and the Warped Tour turned it into like an annual thing where we're going there. I've been there 10 or 11 times.
It's always about expanding your marketplace. I always tell bands, like, how do you build your marketplace?
They must have gone back, not just on the Warped Tour.
Oh, no, they went back after
several times.
Oh,
yeah.
That was their calling card. Like,
that's cool.
All of a sudden. And then, I asked Chris the same question. Did you get back to Australia often?
Oh, yeah. Been back many times, probably since then. I would probably say 12 to 15 times, probably closer to 15. We've been over there quite a bunch, try to hit there every couple of years and do the festivals and whatnot. And of course, haven't been there in a couple of years now because of everything that's been going on, but we'd love to get back.
It opened a door, opened a market, and that's really what we can hope for in a time of touring, to get back to places. But actually, something that spun off of that, Tony, was that there was a person who was working for the promoter named AJ, who ended up spinning off his own festival.
Oh, really?
I worked with him for a long time and loved him like a brother. He rode the ups and downs of the rock industry and always wanted to deliver more. But what he learned from the Warp Festival, I think, was the number one is the customer. You know what I mean? You've got to get them what they want. You've got to have decent toilets, decent bands, and pay attention to the customer. That was the great creed of Soundwave and Band Warp.
Is that tour still going on now?
No, AJ ran into a few problems, as many festival producers do. Soundwave is not going on, but I'd always wonder for a while, like post Warp Tour, like AJ would just show up like random war shows, like in El Paso, Texas.
He was taking notes.
And he was talking to the bands out on the road, and he did build a big festival. But I think with everything, it's manage your expectations, and I think he got to this point that it got so big and so expensive again. But what we did with Warped was we managed our expectations, and those first couple of years especially, we overachieved on those expectations. and we kept the bar low and we jumped over it every time, and we were able to do it. And
Tell me, is Andrew still in the business now up there? Is he still working at it?
yeah, I asked Andrew what he's been up to.
We're really hoping the bands get up this year. We were really, a few of the festivals, Peter Nable's Blues Fest, which is a beautiful festival up in Byron Bay, has been going 30 years, was cancelled at short notice last year. And it sort of shocked the industry a lot. We're hoping all the promoters are getting together and they're hoping to really force a gigantic reopening late in our midsummer and early next year. We just want to follow everywhere else. We go, look, we've just got to get on and deal with this. Take precautions by all means, get vaccinated, get shots, use hygiene, all those sort of things. But we can't stop living, we can't stop, because the lockdown is causing, as enough mental stress for everyone. So we're hoping to get back up and running and follow the rest of the world.
How about Kerry, who started from very humble beginnings as a truck driver or a bus driver, right?
Yeah.
What's he doing?
Also had a little sound company down. He's doing his things. And the thing with Kerry, he was my driver. And then I said, well, if you could make it to America, you're welcome to ride on my bus and come see America.
Oh, that's cool.
And you say that all the time, not expecting anyone to take you up on the offer. And then
see, that's the thing about you, is that if somebody does take you up, you do it.
My wife said, why would you want to go to America and pay your own way? I said, I've never been. And the worst case is I'll get a free trip around America and maybe get a chance to help out and do one last tour. Because I had toured as a touring musician straight after I left school. But if you tour all the time, mate, you don't have time for relationships. So I always made an effort to come home. Other people I toured for long term were Ben Harper. Ben at the time was Artist of the Year in France. And I think I did just about every city in France for 8,000 to 20,000 people. Small towns, bull rings. Then I was with Jack Johnson. And I remember the first show I did with Jack Johnson as a solo was a promotional tour. That was in England at Falmouth Refectory University. We did 1,000 people. 6 months later, he had 2 #1 albums, Curious George and In Between Dreams, I think. And we went back to Europe and we did 20,000 seaters everywhere. And then, obviously, 2013, I then went and worked for Dolly Parton. We'd just finished the Warped Tour. I went straight back to Nashville. And I worked for Dolly for about 9 months, but they were going to Europe, and I came back to do the Warped Tour with my old buds.
I mean, you got to think about it. He took his risk. Of course, I honored my offer. It's amazing what he did. Dolly Parton toured with Slipknot, toured around the world with Jack Johnson.
It's really cool.
And that's what I tell my students. Sometimes you just got to go out on a limb and go for it. And I asked him, was there any lasting impact in his own country from Warped Tour? Because, he lived there all his life and did this. And then we went and did this tour. And I asked him how that went.
Oh, absolutely. Those shows were epic. Never happened since, probably never happen again. But, mate, we bought something that probably never be seen here again. 2013, we tried to do it again with Soundwave's promoter, AJ. And it worked, but I think the nature of touring here, the country centres don't support the touring anymore. So you really are capital cities and then headline shows on the side of that.
Yeah.
So I don't think those days of 98 and 99, 2002 was the other one. I don't think they're going to happen again.
Which is a bummer.
Yeah.
It's a bummer that, like we get to sit here and We talk about these stories, and I hope bands can create those stories again. I hope there's places that you could just go, hey, we're going to pick up some tents. We're going to learn how to surf. We're going to have cricket. I had
It would be helpful if somebody play them on the radio too, so that people know when they're coming to town what's up.
We did a campground one night where we had Aboriginal storytellers come and tell us stories about the culture of Aborigines. We actually met Paul Hogan's club. One night I went down to Paul Hogan's club and said, hey, we're camping over at the field across the way. Can we have a show here? And Hepcat and Royal Crown Review and Clayman played that night. I met some fire twirlers that I said, hey, come on the road with us. I said, why don't you come on the road with us? And they had a term down there that for people who like camp and people that they worked at farms. And down there, they don't have workers that travel. But they called them ferals, like literally called people ferals. And I go, I love these people. And I brought them. I said, jump on the bus. So all of a sudden, these people are jumping on with their fire twirling sticks and drove Andrew crazy. It was like, let's go just do this thing. And I hope someone out there gets to experience that, because that group of people that got to go with me, I think it's the memories that I hold dearest in my heart of so many things I've gotten to do, was just that traveling in Australia, just with the spirit.
Bitching, yeah. Kevin, I want to ask you, and on this Australian episode, and as we wrap this up, would you do it all again? Would you ever do it all?
This is one tour I could do again.
See, that's the difference. See, that's the thing.
I would throw on a bathing suit that you wore every day, rain or shine.
And I also want to ask you, because we have this segment of bands out there to keep an eye on and who to watch. I want to ask you, what kind of band is out there now that you think we should be looking at?
Well, there's a little band called the Meal and the Sniffers that
they're an Australian band. That's amazing.
Australian band that there's so much good music comes out of Australia.
So I'm glad that you said this band. Now they've had a couple of albums out. They're not super new, but they're not known in America. I think they even won Best Rock Album in Australia, but they're young, and this new album that they have out right now is so
great stuff. And that was the part where you look at it, that we met bands like Grinspoon came and toured up here on the Warped Tour. Frenzal Rhomb toured on the Warped Tour up here. We exchanged our cultures or our countries, and they supported us down there, and they came up here. But the living end was guys who showed up in a van.
Right.
Said, can we play at the kickoff
cool.
party? So, I guess we're going to wrap this episode up. I want to thank all the guests that came on. It's funny because we do an episode. We did the Halloween episodes, and I had like 10 people sending me like photos of the vagina that you walk through. It was like crazy how full that like all morning I'm opening up this photo,
God.
like flashing back to that. Yes.
Thanks for everybody who's listening. We appreciate all the comments and texts that you've been sending us.
Yeah, make sure to subscribe to our Spotify, Apple, YouTube pages to know when new episodes are released.
And also follow us on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and Facebook to stay in the loop.
If you want to hear more from us and our guests, subscribe to our Patreon to hear more exclusive content and get a discount on merchandise. A subscription to My Warped Life might make a real gift for the friend, because we are in a supply crisis and we will not run out of subscriptions to our Patreon. There's no supply chain problems. It's only $5.
And they're not on a container ship in Long Beach. Right here, you can get it right now. And don't forget to text us any topics that you want to hear more about at 818-863-6445.
Thank you to Metal Fortress for always replaying our episodes and spreading the word. Listen to Metal Fortress. And now that I have Xavier on my Find My Friends, we can get started on time each and every day.
That's right.
So I'd like to thank Xavier.
Oh, Beata, let's not forget Beata.
We will never forget Beata. She sent us a great photo that she is moving over to the vegan side.
That's right. And Vivian Wang, thank you for all the important
guidance. Can we say Vivian's
guidance?
name now that she's a bigwig at Apple?
Was that beep?
I think that's
beep,
like,
beep,
we can
beep,
black
beep.
beep, beep, beep. We got to bleep that out. And, of course, thank you, Tony, for joining me in the backyard. And to our musician friend.
Yes! Yeah, well, I'm going to let you do it. He loves it when you do it. It's just Dad when I do it.
Oh, yeah. To my great musician friend, Diego Gracia.
Take it away, kid.